Good afternoon. Welcome to the last of our 6-part webinar series, addressing the challenges we're all facing in finding the people we need to fulfill our respective missions. My name is Joanna Truitt, Executive Director of the Association Education Alliance, of which your company is a member through your association membership. Displayed here are the associations participating in this series. Each is a member of the AEA, a consortium of distributor-focused trade associations. Just a quick housekeeping announcement. As you have any questions for Alex, please type them in the Q&A box, and we will address them after his presentation. I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Alex Tchaikovsky is Vice President of Analytics and Consulting for the Miller Resources Group. He's highly experienced market researcher and analyst for more than 20 years, with expertise across subjects including economics, industrial manufacturing, automation, and advanced technology trends. For the last 2 decades, he has consulted and advised companies throughout the US and Canada, Europe, South America, and Asia. As Vice President for Miller Resources Group, Alex is responsible for overseeing a suite of analytics products focused on acquiring good talent. He is also consulting with companies to help them become better at attracting, hiring, and retaining the impact players in their industry. Alex, let me go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Really appreciate the opportunity to join you all today. And thank you for those of you in the audience joining us live today. And I hope those of you that are going to be listening to the recording have enjoyed the series. I'm very pleased to present the final episode of this 2022 series, where the focus has been how to win the war for talent. Today's episode, I wanted to do a review of some of the data that we've seen. We'll talk about the current picture in the labor market. We'll talk about the implications to what that means to 2023. And I'll wrap things up for all of you by, as always, offering actionable and practical advice that you can implement within your own organizations. And I think the key message that I want you to take away today is going to be that it has to be a behavior change, a mindset change. You have to have the senior members of the organization involved in your talent-oriented activities. You have to allocate resources to these tactical initiatives, and you have to follow through. It's a process of continuous improvement over time, and not just a light switch that you can flip on. So we only have a little bit of time together today, so I will get right into the data here. As you can see, the latest snapshot of the national labor market performance shows us data from November of this year, when we added 263,000 jobs. The unemployment rate held steady at 3.7%, and hourly earnings, the year-over-year growth, if you will, in terms of how much people are making, actually ticked up to 5.1%. We were below 5% for the last few months. So the really interesting thing here is that when you look particularly at the unemployment rate, it's not necessarily the same across all jobs. As you can see here, in business and financial sector, the unemployment rate is just 2.4%. In architecture and engineering, it's 2%. Healthcare, management, legal, all of these professions are actually substantially below that national average of 3.7%. So it's important to take note of that, because depending on the position that you're hiring for, it's going to be potentially more difficult or less difficult than what the overall market would represent. So the devil, as I always say, is in the details when it comes to data pertaining to talent. And so you really need to be informed, and you need to be making your decisions based on good quality, actionable data. When we look at 2022 as a year as a whole, it was really a remarkable performance in terms of the job market. You can see overall, we had 76 million total hires during the year. And when you weigh that against the people that either voluntarily or involuntarily left their jobs, we had a net job gain of 4.5 million people. So the actual ranks of the employed swole by over 4.5 million people during the course of 2022. This happened at a time when the actual labor force participation rate has declined. So that means out of the total available pool of labor, we're now looking at a smaller pie, if you will. There's more than 100,000 people that have exited the labor pool over the course of 2022. So we have this dynamic where we're continuing to add jobs. Job openings remain really elevated, as I'll share with you in just a second. But the availability of labor, that total pool, is actually shrinking over time. And there are multiple reasons behind this, for everything from the retirement of the baby boomer generation that's been accelerated by the pandemic, to increased entrepreneurism, to this trend of older, particularly white males, choosing not to go back into the labor market for one reason or another. But so we remain in this really unusual set of parameters for the labor market as we head into 2023. Now, when we consider what sectors continue to add the most jobs, that hasn't changed over the course of this year. It's predominantly those frontline positions. We have leisure and hospitality leading the way in November with 88,000 jobs adding. Education and health services and the government are in second and third position. But in sectors like construction, manufacturing, and yes, even wholesale trade continue to add jobs at a relatively robust clip. And so I want you to take note of that, because oftentimes that doesn't exactly jive with what you hear about in the news. In particular, what you have been seeing is a lot of talk and headlines that have to do with layoffs, massive layoffs, particularly focused on the tech sector. But as you can see here, when you get to the data, it doesn't have this emotional need to influence your thoughts and opinions. It just states facts as they are. And the facts are that in the information technology space in November, we actually added 19,000 jobs. So despite the layoffs at Twitter and Amazon and Ford and all of these other companies that we're hearing about, in IT in particular, job gains continue to happen. And so that type of talent is still going to be very, very difficult to add to your ranks as we look out to 2023 and beyond. There are, of course, the flip side of that coin, the sectors that lost jobs over the course of the year. And those sectors are the ones that tend to be extremely exposed to the Fed's policy of increasing interest rates. So as you can see here, anything related to construction activity, particularly on the residential side, building materials, framing contractors, credit intermediation, furniture and home stores, and even industrial building construction, those sectors lost jobs. And interest rate policy sensitive sectors are also taking a big hit as far as the job market is concerned. And so that's everything from financial institutions, insurance carriers, real estate appraisal, leasing and lending firms, and even in some cases, banks. So those are the sectors that are overtly exposed to and are in a detrimental way to a rising interest rate environment. But when you look on the right-hand side of this chart, you see that there's been pretty widespread job gains across a multitude of other industries, everything from automotive and catering services, convention and trade shows. Actually, I'm at a big exhibition of trade show organizers today in Louisville, and business is booming for those companies. Data science, frontline hospitality and leisure workers at bars and hotels, men's clothing stores, software publishers, taxi and limo services. All of these sectors have added substantial amounts of jobs in 2022. And as we look out to 2023, a lot of these trends will continue to take hold, particularly anything related to residential market activity, new home construction, sales, mortgages, leasing activity is going to continue to face significant headwinds. And sectors that are in manufacturing, in non-residential construction, in as I'll show you momentarily, the sector that has to do with wholesale trade, distribution in general, is actually expected to do quite well when you look out towards 2023. Now, why is that? Well, the reason that's driving that relatively strong outlook for the labor market in 2023, despite the fact that we had yet another interest rate hike announced by the Fed today, despite the fact that increasingly and with more and more consensus opinion, we are heading into a recessionary environment. Still, the majority of pundits say that the recession that's likely to happen in 2023 will be mild. It will likely be contained to that year, but it's also going to be extremely uncharacteristic of the past recessions, particularly if you look at the last two, which is, of course, the 2020 recession that happened as a result of our shutdown during the initial wave of the pandemic, and the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. Really, as you look back in history, most recessions are coupled with significant job losses. The labor market suffers immensely during typical recessionary conditions, but we're not expecting that to happen this time around. And one of the main reasons for that is, as you can see, despite the fact that job openings have started to come down from the peak level of nearly 12 million that we had back earlier in 2022, we're still at a very elevated level. There are, as of November, 10.3 million job openings in the United States. And you can see, historically speaking, that is at least 3 to 5 million higher than the average number of job openings in the US economy pre-pandemic. So we are going to have a closing of the gap. Those job openings are likely going to continue to come down in the months to come. And the number of people in the unemployment ranks will likely go up from the 5.5 million people searching for work right now. But the delta, the difference between the number of available jobs and the amount of people looking for work, while shrinking, is still not going to turn negative, meaning that we are going to remain in a candidate-driven market for the foreseeable future, certainly, but likely for the majority of 2023. And so as you think about the implications of that to your organization, it might get a little bit easier to find talent, and it might get a little bit cheaper to hire people, but you're still going to have to bring your best game to the marketplace. You're still going to have to be very competitive on the compensation side. You're still going to have to sell and market yourself to potential job candidates because they're going to have options available to them. So as we look at where those opportunities are going to be most significant, it's going to be in the parts of the country where we've had massive migration into. And as you can see here, despite the fact that the national unemployment level is 3.7%, you can see many of the big metropolitan areas here, as it stands today, are actually substantially below that. So starting with the northern part of the country, Boston, which is close to my home in New Hampshire, at 2.8% unemployment, Minneapolis at just 1.7%. You can see much of the South here is substantially below the national unemployment rate. So if you're in Dallas or certainly in Austin, anywhere in Florida, in Georgia, in North Carolina, and even in Missouri, you're going to have a tough time finding talent. Even portions of California, which people have been moving out of, you can see the difference between San Francisco, which still has a relatively vibrant tech scene, it has a much lower unemployment rate than the likes of Los Angeles, which is actually above the national average. So remember that comment I made, the devil is always in the detail? Well, here's a good example of why. Depending on where you are and whether or not you have the ability to hire people remotely for positions that can allow them to work from anywhere in the country, if you're looking for local talent, you might have a significantly uphill battle in terms of attracting talent to your organization and certainly keeping the people that you have within your workforce right now as well. So as we look out towards 2023, we are forecasting there's going to be more job additions over the course of the year. It's still going to be a very robust jobs market. You can see the top two categories, professional and business services and trade, transportation, and utilities, really talk to the heart of the wholesale distribution space. And in particular, if I look at trade, transportation, and utilities, this actually includes the distribution industry. So you can see here, 12.7 new hires are projected for the segment that includes distribution in 2023. So while things might get a little bit easier for you, it's still going to be very much a tough job market, and you're going to have to do your very best to differentiate yourself from your competitors, both within your industry and relative to other sectors, in order to have a chance of landing those impact players for your companies. So with all of that having been said, I hope I laid out the stage for you that while things are starting to gradually improve, we're certainly not out of the woods yet when it comes to talent. The pendulum is not going to swing to the other side where it's going to become an employer-driven market once again. So in order to cope with that, I wanted to give you some very specific pieces of advice. And we've been talking about this throughout the series over the course of 2022, but I really wanted to put it in a concise format for you. And we'll start with the number one step and the real call to action that I hope many of you take away from this series, which is it is not just an HR function. The senior leadership of every organization has to be involved in crafting and continuously refining a talent-oriented strategy for it to result in the type of outcomes that you want. The reason why it's so important that senior leadership is involved is both in terms of buy-in, changing the behavior and the habits related to attracting, hiring, and retaining workers, but also because it is the senior leadership that has the ability to allocate the necessary resources, to pull the levers that need to be pulled in order to address the shortcomings that your business may or may not face when it comes to attracting, hiring, and retaining workers. And those resources are multifaceted. It can be time, so allocating people's schedules to work on a particular project. It can be money, actually setting aside additional budget dollars to pay your people better in 2023 than you did even this year or certainly in the years beyond. It could be the necessity to actually get involved hands-on on some of these projects themselves. But these resources, the ability to deploy them in areas that are needed, that's very much why senior leadership of each organization needs to be involved and to work in partnership with the HR leadership to bring about the changes that you want to see in order to establish this comprehensive talent strategy that focuses on the three pillars, which is, of course, how do you bring people in? Why do people want to work for your company? How do you then effectively and efficiently hire those people that come in for interviews? And most importantly, how do you convince and entice the people that you already have working for you to remain where they are? So those two things go hand in hand, but they're very important. The other element that's kind of big picture in nature that I wanted to impart on you is that you cannot win the war for talent on your own. It requires ammunition in the form of great information, and it requires more than anything else, alliances and partnerships. And so you have to be, as a leader, data-driven in your decision-making. You have to be data-driven when it comes to your compensation strategies. You have to be data-driven when it comes to understanding who it is that's coming in for interviews and using insights from a questionnaire that we talked about called CLAMPS in order to really tailor those conversations for those particular individuals. You have to be tracking and interpreting and then acting upon different hiring and retention metrics. If you don't measure it, you can't get better over time. And so the first step is you've got to get that data in there and you've got to make decisions based on data rather than on emotion or fear or kind of that gut feeling that many business leaders, particularly of smaller companies, tend to have as their North Star. And beyond being data-driven, you have to have partnerships and alliances, whether it's an internal or an external recruiting partner, someone that can come in and do leadership training for your mid-layer management team, because as we know, it is the direct relationship between the employee and their manager that oftentimes results in someone leaving the company above all else, right? So you have to have people management training to deal with issues like DEI and mental health, and really, recognize the fact that if someone's a good salesperson and you promote them to a sales manager, that doesn't all of a sudden give them people management skills overnight. And so you have to bring some of that training in through partnerships and alliances. And then when it gets down to the actual cornerstone pillars on the attraction side, you have to treat that as a sales and marketing activity within your organization. It's got to be a pitch that your company can deliver to the marketplace, to potential candidates, explaining to them exactly why they would want to come and work for you. And in order to actually have them come in for that interview, you have to understand what motivates them. So CLAMPS, as I mentioned earlier, is a great tool in doing that. You're welcome to go back and look at previous recordings of this series to get more detailed information on that. As you go through the hiring process, it is absolutely vital that you are as efficient as possible. Most candidates in the marketplace right now prefer that an employer lets them know that they're interested in 2 interviews or less. So if you're still conducting 4, 5, 6 interviews within your organization, ask yourself, number one, why? And number two, is that the best, most efficient way for us to do this? Or can we perhaps get all of those people in a room and get the process to be much more efficient? In addition, you have to communicate. Communicate. That is the name of the game. If you haven't had a touch point with a candidate within 3 days, whether it's a email, a text message, a phone call, some sort of communication to them, you're likely starting to lose them to other opportunities in the marketplace. And then finally, when it comes to keeping the people that you have, I cannot stress this enough. Next year will still be a challenge. What we see is great data. I have a LinkedIn post today. If you're not following me on LinkedIn, I encourage you to do that. According to ADP, it's shown that people that switch jobs on average got a 16% raise this year versus people that stayed in their current positions got closer to 7 or 8%. And so it's still going to be an incentive for folks to look for other opportunities. So if you want to keep people, you have to, first of all, pay them well, but then you also have to ask them for their input. You have to listen to what they tell you, and then you actually have to act upon that in order to improve things or move them in the direction that your staff is telling you. This is very, very important. And what we do see is that, particularly on that compensation side that I touched on earlier, I've done several projects with organizations where I assess the competitive nature of the pay packages with their existing work staff. And what I found is that on average, about 30 to 40% of any given organization's folks are currently at least 20% or more below the competitive market rate in terms of compensation. So if you haven't done an analysis like that, I highly encourage you to start. If you'd like to discuss it, certainly feel free to reach out to me and we can go through the details, but you have to know where you stand and you have to, again, ask for that input, listen, and respond to your people in order to keep them. So I want to make sure that we leave some time for Q&A. So I want to open it up to you now at this point for any questions that are there. Joanna?
Yep, we just have one question, and it was whether or not the presentation would be available because she'd like to share it with others in the team. Just to let you know, we do share a PDF of the presentation with your respective association and the recording, as well as a link to the recording. I know for some associations, those recordings are put on the website for members to access.
So I want to give you the opportunity to ask any other questions before we wrap things up. I'm sure there are many things on your mind as you head into 2023. It doesn't have to be about something you heard about today, anything else related to talent or the economy at large. I do want to take this opportunity as you think of those questions to actually mention that we are planning a new series for the first half of next year that's going to be more macroeconomically focused. We'll talk about the impact of interest rate policy and inflation. We'll look at input prices. We'll look at the macroeconomic environment. We'll look at things like supply chain issues and transportation and logistics costs, and really all of the economic data that drives decision-making within the distribution industry. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. If you are interested, please make sure you let your association know so that they can sign up. It's going to be an opt-in kind of session. And I believe we do have a question here.
Yep, we do. It's from Bill. I keep hearing that the economy is transitioning from goods to services, but the data you shared seems to suggest a big investment in manufacturing, which is goods production. Thoughts on where we are in the cycle?
So yes, absolutely. I think that there's clearly a transition in behavior that's going on, Bill, and that is, we are no longer confined to our homes. We're no longer trying to prevent interaction with others as COVID fades into the past. That's not to say that people aren't still getting sick, but in terms of our ability to open up and get back to life as normal pre-COVID type of behavior, we are able to do things more, and that doing includes more social events, more going out to the movies, more eating out at restaurants, more attending concerts and sporting events and things of that nature. And so when we talk about a shift from goods to services, that's absolutely happening. We now have the ability to spend our money in ways that are more behavioral rather than focused on stuff. Now, at the same time, I think that we have other trends going on that are very much driving the investment in manufacturing. This vulnerability of supply chains that we saw over the course of the pandemic. We really want to be able to ensure that that breakdown doesn't repeat once again. And so there's a tremendous amount of investment happening in the United States in different manufacturing sectors, whether it's energy related, if you look at natural gas and oil and the infrastructure behind that, liquefaction is a good example, whether or not it's component production. We really don't want to have to rely on getting stuff here from China and then having, it sit off the coast of California for months at a time. We want to have a producer that's both local and one that's in a region that's outside of the US, but still closer to home. So looking at Mexico, Central America, perhaps even Canada. But there is a great amount of investment going on in manufacturing in the United States. It's both foreign direct investment, which is companies coming to the US and establishing facilities here and manufacturing plants. And it is American companies increasing their throughput and their infrastructure. The semiconductor industry is a great example of that. Intel is building new plants, as well as other companies from overseas. Taiwan Semiconductors coming in and building new facilities. Samsung is building new facilities. So there is a renaissance in US manufacturing happening, and that doesn't go in contrast to the shift from goods to services, but rather talks to the vulnerability of the supply chain and is based on the lessons we learned as a result of the pandemic. So I hope that somewhat long-winded answer answers your question.
Perfect.
All
Any
right.
other questions for the group, for Alex? Well, I'm not seeing any. So what I would like to do is, Alex, thank you so much for the great information you provided, not only today, but throughout this series. And thank you for all of you on the call who have participated in many of these sessions. As I indicated before, by the end of the week, the association of which you're a member will be receiving a link to the recording as well as a PDF of the presentation. And again, we hope that you and your family have a really fun and restful holiday season. And we look forward to seeing you in 2023.
Absolutely. I want to also echo that. Happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas. Whatever you celebrate, have a joyous holiday season. And I look forward to seeing you on the next series next year. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.